Hi, I'm State Senator Bruce Tarr, the Assistant Minority Leader of the Massachusetts State Senate, welcoming you to this month's edition of Across the Aisle. And I'm here with a very special guest and also my very distinguished co-host in the Senate.
Bruce, it's great to be here again. My name is Steve Bedore. I'm a state senator from Methuen all the way up to Newburyport. It's wonderful to be back here with Across the Aisle and to welcome this month's guest, John Hurst, who is the president of the Retailers Association of Massachusetts. John, great to have you back.
Thank you. It's great to be back with you both because you're both two of our greatest friends in the legislature.
We appreciate that.
Thanks, John. It's always great to have a conversation with you because you always have the pulse of what's going on in the business community. And Steve and I know that these have been very difficult times, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what it's been like during this recession for retailers in our Commonwealth.
And also, John, tell us a little bit about the Retailers Association of Massachusetts as well.
Okay, well, we've been around since 1918. We have about 3,300 members. They're all primarily the small mom and pop stores and restaurants you see on main streets across the Commonwealth. We are there to be the advocates for the retail employment sector across the state. So we lobby the legislature, to lobby the state administration. We also provide group buying type of benefits for our members. We try to level the playing field for the little mom and pop store and restaurant, to allow them to compete with the big national competitors, and that's what we're all about. And our members, really are the backbone of this economy. And it's been a tough stretch. It's no secret that the retail sector really feels the economic downturn before any other sector. We also feel the economic growth before most sectors because, when you think about it, the consumer really represents 70% of our economy. And the consumer is so vital to making sure that our economy moves forward and grows. And for our sector, we really felt the best of economic growth and best of economic times in 2006 and through most of 2007. And since then, there was a slow drop, but it's been very difficult since then. And only now, in 2010, are we starting to exceed the prior year. Most of 2010 for most stores and restaurants are exceeding 2009, but that's because 2009 was so bad. We still aren't back to where we were in 2007, nowhere near it.
One of the issues I know Bruce and I hear a lot about, especially from small business owners throughout both of our districts, is the fact about that leveling that playing field. And one of the areas that we're trying to level that playing field is in healthcare costs and the cost of premiums. And we've all seen the sort of big business, big government seeing single-digit increases in their premiums, small businesses seeing double-digit increases in their premiums. One of the issues that Bruce and I champion, and we've tried for 6 years, I think now, 7 years, to get the legislature and the governor to pass and to sign into law is this group purchasing. Right. Talk a little bit about what impact that will have on the small business community throughout the Massachusetts, specifically up here in the Merrimack Valley, where we compete with New Hampshire a lot more aggressively than most other parts of the Commonwealth.
Well, we really appreciate both of your efforts because this was the most important issue that small businesses across the Commonwealth have been yelling for and asking for many years now. And you both recall, we tried to actually get this done when the original, quote, reform, Massachusetts healthcare reform, went through in 2005 and 2006. Through a lot of opposition from insurers and others, we were stopped in that effort. And what we were trying to do was to make sure if government is going to say that you small business owner and you family member must buy health insurance, then the government should not be standing in the way for them to have the opportunity at least to get comparable coverage for comparable premiums. And that's the reality of what we've existed in here in Massachusetts. And we've seen, frankly, big government getting great rates on health insurance, big business doing just fine with health insurance rates, but small businesses seeing year after year double-digit increases, and all the employees and the families that work for small businesses, just seeing those unaffordable increases. That was unsustainable economically, politically, legally. If this wasn't going to get fixed, someone was going to go to court and perhaps even deep six the whole large reform.
And in terms of savings, John, what will it mean for sort of how will it work? I know Bruce and I were successful this year in getting it as part of the reform package in terms of healthcare, but impact, what will it mean for a small business owner? What can they do? What will you be doing to help them get through this difficult time?
Well, I can tell you, we, besides having a lot of mom and pop members, we have national chains as members. And I can see the rates that they pay. And by and large, a big company or a big government can buy a family health care policy for about what a small business pays for a single policy.
Crazy.
I mean, it is absolutely mind-boggling, the price difference. We're not talking hundreds of dollars, we're talking thousands of dollars. And you cannot tell me that employees of small businesses are 2-3 times less healthy than employees of state government. Of course, the state has the GIC group buying for state government. The Mass Municipal Association does for cities and towns. Big employers can group buy and self-insure. What we're trying to do is to maybe not get exactly the same level of premiums and coverage, but we're trying to move them, the needle in that direction and get them at least in the ballpark and get it down to hundreds or not thousands of dollars of difference.
And John, one of the things that we felt particularly strongly about is as we talk about the recovery that's going on in the recession, and we hope that it continues, it's been a little bit dubious over the last several months, but that retailers will actually be able to add and maintain employees, because that's certainly been an issue that even as things have gotten a little better, folks have been hesitant to bring people back. In that regard, tell us a little bit about what having affordable health insurance will mean to being able to keep and add employees, because it is an incremental cost every time you add another employee for that health insurance.
Look, if you're a small business trying to survive, not thrive, but survive in the economic downturn like we've experienced, and you're seeing your receipts drop. There are small businesses out there that have seen receipts drop, 20% versus the heyday of 2006 and 2007. Your receipts are down, therefore your profitability is down, yet your costs are still up. Your healthcare costs is up. Perhaps we have members since the original quote reform went through in 2005, 2006. Our average members have seen cumulatively 73% increases. That cost is going up far too fast. And other costs you can't cut back on. You can't cut on your rent. You've got to, if your receipts are down, you've got to cut back on costs somewhere. And by and large, it's all been in salaries. It's been on employment. And we cannot move this economy forward until two things happen. Consumers start spending again, and small businesses can hire again.
Right, and part of the problem too with those small businesses is they're mom and pop stores, they're owner operated. So when you say a cut in sort of salaries, that's a cut to the individual family, while everything else is increasing. And that's why Bruce and I have fought so hard on a bipartisan fashion to provide small businesses with the relief that they need. And one of the other areas that Bruce and I really fought aggressively for, in part because of the communities that we represent, was a sales tax holiday. Talk a little bit about the impact the sales tax holiday has had on your businesses and on the Commonwealth as a whole.
Well, look, again, the consumer is 70% of the economy, and the consumer, with good reason, their incomes maybe are down to flat, and they're worried about the economy. They've held back in their spending, and for the retail sector, that's been very, very difficult. So you got to create incentives for the consumer to invest back in themselves and invest back in the local economy. And the great thing about the sales tax holiday, go figure why it works. I think it's a Boston Tea Party effect, so to speak. Hey, well, if the government's going to give me a tax break, yeah, I'm going to take advantage of it. And by and large, we've had 6 sales tax holidays out of the last 7 years. Unfortunately, last year we didn't have one. And that was the same year we had that 25% sales tax increase, which both of you strongly opposed. We thank you for that. But we had one the sales tax holiday this year, and it was probably our most effective of those 6. And I think it was partly pent-up demand, but also maybe a little anger, frankly. Hey, the tax went up, we're going to take advantage if the government's going to give us that break. And for Main Street retailers, you're double hit anymore with both. Of course, you have the New Hampshire competition that's been there forever, but for 9 years running now, the internet has grown double digits in sales, 9 years in a row. even in this economic downturn, the Amazon.coms of the world are seeing double-digit increases, and that's tax-free. And what we need to do is to look at ways that government really should not be picking winners and losers in the marketplace, and they're giving these out-of-state employers, they don't even employ people here, they're giving out-of-state employers a 6.25% head start over our local Main Street businesses, and we've got to fix that.
And John, there's a lot of debate about that at the federal level as well, and maybe you could help us to understand what's going on there, because I know a number of federal legislators in the U.S. Congress have proposed trying to change that. Could you give us a little bit of insight into what's happening with that?
Well, the reason that states haven't been able to fix this is because of a U.S. Supreme Court decision. Now, this dates back clear back to the 60s and 70s. You know, before you had the technology, you really had the ability. What the court was saying was that if you cannot make an out-of-state entity collect the tax if they don't have tax nexus. Therefore, you know, employment facilities in the state, because it's too hard. Well, so what we're trying to do is a two-prong approach. In the state levels, particularly states like New York and others that have fairly complicated tax levels. You know, we only have one tax rate, but some of these other states have multiple levels, you know, city, county, and so forth, and very difficult levels of compliance. Streamline those on one level, on the state level. And then in the Congress say, okay, once the states do that, the states do have the authority to mandate these out-of-state entities to collect the tax. Because look, the tax is owed. You know, it's really an issue of collection. Because you know, if you go online right now and make a purchase, you as a Massachusetts consumer are supposed to remit the tax yourself, a use tax to the state. Now we all know people don't do that. So in order to really help our Main Street employers, you know, we have to pass legislation down in Congress to allow the states the ability to mandate that tax collection.
So,
frankly, it would have been about the same amount of tax that we're missing right now as the increase that occurred a year ago. That is that much money that is going uncollected because the state doesn't have the authority
And John,
to make them do it.
how would you address the issue if someone would argue that we're raising taxes? I mean, though Bruce and I think have a pretty solid record in terms of not voting to increase taxes, in terms of leveling that playing field for brick and mortar stores here in Massachusetts. What argument would you give those to say it's really not an increase, it's a level?
Well, it's every state has a sales tax and use tax law, and you know, if it's a sales tax, if indeed the seller has tax nexus and has to collect it on behalf, you know, essentially a tax collector for the state. If they don't have tax nexus, the consumer themselves are supposed to remit to the state. You know, so really the tax is there. It's supposed to be paid. It just isn't. But you know, we're getting to the point that, you know, we either need it applied to those out-of-state entities, or we need to remove it from our local employers, because we cannot afford to have that disparity any longer.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And let's talk about a couple of tax issues, though, that we do control. And just to take a step back for our viewers, one of the things that Steve and I worked on at the close of the legislative session was an entire package of economic reorganization legislation. And it did have some other tax components. So we've talked about the sales tax holiday, which was certainly consumer-oriented, but there were a couple of business-oriented tax pieces in that as well, one of them being the ability to carry forward losses. And John, we think that's particularly important for those who are sticking with us in these difficult economic times. They're taking losses, they need to be incented and rewarded for that. Can tell us a little bit about that and how you think that will play out over the next few years?
Well, you know, that we're moving from 5 years to 20. You know, how long you can carry forward those losses. And you know, particularly when you think about what's happened in the whole last decade, you know, we haven't had a whole lot of economic growth. You know, we had some early in the decade and then, of course, none in the last few years. You know, there have been a lot of companies that have carried losses many, many years forward. What that change was to go to 20 years is, frankly, it's the norm in other states.
Yeah.
We really did not have a good law here in Massachusetts, only 5 years. It was a common sense change, and it was an important reform, and we appreciate that. It's really going to particularly help some smaller businesses and cyclical businesses as well.
And one of the other areas that I know Bruce was very actively engaged in, and I was as well, was the small business impact statements in terms of what the impact will be on regulatory changes. So talk a little bit about, John, what impact that's going to have, because I think it's a huge positive step forward for the Commonwealth, for small businesses especially.
Well, people, a lot of people think, including my members, think that laws change when the legislature or the Congress, change laws. But in reality, laws can change in another way. And regulatory agencies, we have a vast array of them here in Massachusetts. Some would argue maybe too many. They have the ability to promulgate regulations. And there really isn't a whole lot of oversight there. They'll draft a regulation. They may have one hearing, and people can come in and testify and put in comments. But after that, they promulgate it. They send it to the Secretary of State, and it becomes law. There's no oversight really. A lot of states have the legislature look at these regulations and say, yeah, that follows the statute, legislative intent, and there really isn't a fiscal impact and so forth. We don't have that in Massachusetts, and what we're looking to do with this new change is to really have those regulatory agencies become accountable and to really look and see what is the impact, particularly on the bulk of our economy, and that's the small business. That's they really can't take any more red tape and increase costs. And we've seen, unfortunately, even in a downturn, a few cases over the last few years of unnecessary new regulation. And in two cases, they went overboard so much that it ended up being preempted by federal law. You can't put your local small employers at a disadvantage versus those over the border. And that's what we're trying to do with these regulatory impact statements, really look at the impact.
One of the things that Steve and I have been concerned about is the development of sort of a tangled web of bureaucracy that oftentimes ensnares the small business, in which case, even if you're trying to achieve compliance, the cost of that might be unduly burdensome. But before we move too quickly off the subject of taxes, I know there was another tax piece that was in this economic reorganization bill that I think is very important. I know Steve does too, and that has to do with people that invest in small businesses in Massachusetts who actually make a commitment to our economy. And we know that right now, oftentimes investment capital is hard to come by. So let's talk for just a moment about the reduced capital gains tax and what that might do to help the overall business climate.
Well, 3% capital gains on investment of Massachusetts-based companies. That is very significant. What we're talking about is a very low tax rate for people that want to invest in emerging new small businesses, people that are going to actually employ folks and pay taxes and move our economy forward here in the Commonwealth. And again, this was a very important reform, a common sense one. It puts us back more into the mainstream of where our big competitors are. It was common sense and a very important reform that the legislature brought about.
Well, I think one of the things too, John, that we would note is that unlike other states which have gotten into a lot of bidding wars about trying to attract business, the tool that we put into place actually forgoes some revenue, but doesn't cause the state to write a huge paycheck to try to compete with another state to bring a business here. So we would agree that it is very commonsensical, and we think it'll have very positive results.
Yeah, that was a good bill, a lot of good important things, tax-wise, regulatory relief-wise, a sales tax holiday. We extended the construction permits. In a downturn, let's face it, whether you're building a home or you're building a new commercial property, a lot of people have run into some financial issues, and getting finances during this downturn, getting from their local bank or wherever, and it's not always easy to get those local construction permits, and as they expire, you may be talking processes of years.
And money.
And a lot of money.
Well, it's expensive.
So the legislature extended those for 2 years, and that was a very, very important reform as well.
One of the things, John, I think that's really, exciting about why Bruce and I do these types of shows and why we sort of continue to meet with folks is we get great ideas. And the issue in terms of the impact that regulators are having on small business and the fact that there's very little legislative oversight. As we were talking earlier, I think Bruce and I are going to file this as a bill into next year's legislative session, is a legislative commission, I think made up of experts outside of the legislature to review every single regulatory decision. Because again, that's one way that we can really show our small business community that we care, that we want them to stay and invest in Massachusetts. Because you're right, that's one way that sort of we can sneak things in, or that they sneak things in, I should say. In the legislature, just because of our role, we don't necessarily hear about it until it's too late.
Well, I think that's a great idea. States like Ohio and Texas have that. We had an ID theft reg that went through, a privacy reg that went through this a couple of years ago, and a lot of the folks that were really the leaders on that legislation as the statute went through, said, well, this was, the regulation that was drafted out of this was not our intent. What we need is, frankly, maybe a legislative body to take a look at these proposed regulations and say, yeah, this was our intent, or no, it wasn't our intent. Yeah, this is affordable. No, it's not affordable. Yeah, this is a good thing for employment and small businesses, or no, it isn't. And be a stopgap, a check and balance, so to speak, on really some folks who legislate by regulation.
It might be a great role for either outside group or for the Economic Development Committee, which I know you serve on, is to have that sort of regular role of sort of oversight. We have in the Senate the Post Oversight Committee, but again, I think that's a good role for economic development to ensure that the regulations are what we as a legislature draft them, what we want them to be, as opposed to sort of this broad scope in which they go way beyond the legislative intent.
And of course, our viewers right now are getting a rare experience to see a bill being drafted
Yeah,
on
exactly,
camera
right.
as we try to work this out. I would suggest that we need to be mindful of the Constitution, which prohibits us from issuing a legislative veto over an executive action. So Steve is right. The right way to do it would be to have a review that could inform the legislature's further action, but we can't reserve to ourselves a veto. Now, one way to accomplish that might well be to allow anything to be reviewed by the Committee on Post-Audit and Oversight upon the petition of a member of the legislature or a group of citizens. But I think we'd all agree that there has to be a way to look at regulation, because it does have the force of law and it can have very negative impacts as well as positive impacts in terms of protecting public health and safety. We certainly understand the positive ones. I think we would agree we need to understand the negative ones better so that we can be proactive as a legislature to partner with the business community, not only to get compliance, but to make sure that they have sustainable businesses in our state.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. We're not trying to overrule the governor and his administration. We're just trying to create some checks and balances and make sure that they are going down the route that the legislature intended in the first place, and this is the right thing for the good of all.
Right. Speaking of citizen redress and being able to deal with grievances, one of the things that we did in this bill was also to adjust the amount of venue or the amount of eligibility in the small claims courts of the Commonwealth. And we know that for a lot of small businesses on the main streets of our state, this is the way that they're able to collect bad debt. They don't have the infrastructure or the resources to do something else. And so increasing the jurisdictional amount to $7,000, we think will have a major impact. What do you think, John?
No, I think it's great. Look, a lot of small businesses, obviously they don't have an attorney on staff, they don't have a debt collection company that they pay. The way to really collect on bad debts is to go to small claims court, and frankly, the $2,000 level, that might have made sense, 3 decades ago, but it doesn't make sense anymore. And the $7,000 level was a common sense type of movement, and it's going to save a lot of small businesses a lot of time, a lot of effort, and the ability to go in and collect what's owed them without spending a whole lot of money.
Right, because part of the problem with that was a lot of small businesses would throw good money at bad. They would have to hire an attorney to go in to collect $4,000 or $3,000, and it wasn't worth it. So they allow that debt to just sort of go away.
And you really don't need to hire an attorney to go to small claims.
Right.
Turning to the bigger picture, John, one of the things that Steve and I have worked on together for a number of years is the issue of having zero-based budgeting. And part of that concept is to look every 4 years at where your spending is going to go so that you can have benchmarks to measure it against. Now, the analog to that we were able to put into this bill is actually a form of that to cause the governor to have an economic development plan out for the next 4 years of his or her administration. And we think that will help to coordinate a lot of these issues so that everyone's on the same page when we talk about regulation, tax policy, permitting, those kind of things. And I know you've had a lot of input into that provision of the bill, and maybe you could share with us some of your insight.
Well, you know what, I've seen this over 20 years now, through a lot of different administrations, and you've seen a lot of different reworkings of the economic, a lot of different names, a lot of different agencies, a lot of different ways to attract jobs and help jobs and so forth. As someone whose job it is to interact with them and deal with them, I'm always confused. I've always been confused on how this is happening and what really the plan is, because it just keeps evolving from administration to administration. I think this is a common sense thing that's going to really make them do what, frankly, a lot of businesses do as commonplace. Yeah. Some real strategic planning, and lay it out there. This is what we want to do. This is where we want to go, and lay it out there in plain English for everyone to see and to really put some input back into.
And we tend to think that will help the public get involved too, because
Right.
if everyone knows what the plan is,
Right.
everyone can do their part to advance it.
Right. I think it's frankly putting some normal policies that commonly occur in the private sector to work in the public sector.
It's simple common sense. And one of the other areas that we touched upon in this bill was there is a multitude of quasi-public economic development sort of agencies, associations, whatever you want to call them, with huge salaries, huge bureaucratic positions. And we merged a lot of those into one, eliminated some, sort of tried to streamline that, similar to zero-based budgeting. It finally took us to look at these quasis to say, okay, enough is enough. What thoughts were in that? What impact will that have on small businesses?
I'm all for streamlining, as much as possible within the government, because number one, it's going to save you money, I think. Number two, it's going to make a lot more sense to small businesses and consumers and others, on who to deal with, how to deal with, these various state agencies. And, frankly, I think some of these agencies have been out there and just not really well supervised. They become their own kingdom, so to speak, and I think they need to be more accountable. And I think this is going a long way. How long did it take us to finally reorganize the transportation portion of government? And thankfully that has happened. And now we're going to do this as well with some of these economic and quasis, and it's a good thing.
Well put. John, we have about 2.5 to 3 minutes left to go, and even though it's several months before Christmas, we want to ask you, pretend you're sitting in front of the fireplace, the Christmas tree is in the corner. What's on your wish list for the coming legislative session before we wrap the show?
Other than, of course, the re-election of Bruce Tarr and Steve.
Well, that is number one. And beyond that, frankly, I could use about 100 more stevedores and Bruce Tarrs in the legislature, to be quite honest with you, because you guys are our top drawer as far as small businesses are considering. But look, we took an important step on healthcare, but we've got to go further. We've got to get these cooperatives implemented and running, but we got to take some of the workings of those cooperatives and apply it to other small businesses that won't get into those cooperatives and give them the tools that big businesses have. Implement wellness programs and be able to have some real impact based upon how they shop and where they shop for their health care, have it actually impact their premiums. If they become good consumers and become healthier, that should have an impact on their premiums, right?
Absolutely.
Right now, that does not occur for small businesses.
Totally divorced.
It's a socialized system for employers of 50 and under, where it isn't for 51 and over, and that's wrong when you're trying to create a system that you want to make yourselves and your employees better consumers, shop better, go to the right places. Don't go to the emergency room for for a cold. Go to a doctor's office. Know where to shop. Do wellness programs, get healthier, bring your claims down. That should bring your premiums down, right? That doesn't happen today. We're going to be doing that in cooperatives, but we got to find ways to make sure that happens for all small businesses as well. Because right now, they're second-class citizens.
Steve, I think we have our marching orders for the next session.
Yes, we do.
And we'll certainly be working on healthcare and a whole host of other issues. And we encourage you to stay in touch with us about those issues. You can reach my office at bruce.tarr@state.ma.us. Our fax number is 617-722-1310. And Steve, your contact information is?
617-722-1604 is our telephone number. Our fax number is 617-722-1999, and the same steve.bedore at ma.us, ma.state.us. So appreciate that and look forward to receiving input as we move forward.
You've seen the kind of partnership that we can have as legislators and with individual organizations, but you know what? Good government depends on your partnership as well. So please get in touch with us. Let's work toward a better Commonwealth, and thanks again for sharing the time with us on Across the Aisle.